So today we're going to talk about Monster Hunter clones. What makes a Monster Hunter clone? Why would it be classified as a clone? And why wouldn't it be classified as a clone? So, Monster Hunter is an incredibly influential series. And without influence, Monster Hunter itself wouldn't even exist. So, today we're gonna discuss Monster Hunter clones along with games in the same subgenre. Because Monster Hunter at its core is an action RPG, which has a knack for hunting. Hunting is its central focus, hunting and preparation, and really good fucking combat. And over the past several years, there's been a lot of games that have tried to replicate what Monster Hunter does. Some a lot more than others. But that's not exactly what makes a Monster Hunter clone at all. And if you were to use that logic, then Monster Hunter itself would be a clone of the original Phantasy Star Online. Because that's the game that kind of pioneered this genre, really. It started it. And Monster Hunter only kind of took what Phantasy Star did and just applied more of a central focus on hunting. Influence is really important in the gaming industry, and a lot of our favorite franchises wouldn't even exist without influence. There's definitely a big difference between influence and copying someone's fucking homework. I think we all know that. And as kids, when we were younger, it was so easy to see something that was similar to something we loved, and we called it a clone, or a copycat, or whatever the fuck. That's a low-hanging fruit, right? But that's where influence comes from. And I think what makes a Monster Hunter clone a clone is when it takes a bit too much from its inspiration. Because then it's a lot less of a gray area and more of kind of copying a bit too much. And a lot of the games you see on screen now, I wouldn't even call these games clones. A lot of games like God Eater, Tokiden, even Freedom Wars, they all do very similar things to Monster Hunter, but they do a lot of different things from Monster Hunter. And in some cases, some of those things are a bit better than what Monster Hunter does. God Eater is actually a really good example, because God Eater's central focus isn't exactly around hunting per se, it's more about world building and telling a story. And God Eater's story is pretty engaging. Whether you think it's anime cheese bullshit or not, it does tell an engaging story. As for Monster Hunter, story is Monster Hunter's weakest point. While on the other hand, God Eater's gameplay, while still being fun and pretty addicting at times, is a lot more clunkier than Monster Hunter. And at the time of release for God Eater 2 Rage Burst, Monster Hunter World wasn't really a thing yet. So, if it's even clunkier than old Monster Hunter, then that's clunky as shit. But that's the awesome thing about inspiration, is that we're able to get a bunch of franchises and games that are a lot like our favorite franchises, just kind of different, and sometimes really different, with a hint of inspiration. But on the other side of that, there are some games that, as I said before, take this to an extreme, to the point where you're kind of looking at someone's homework and you copy most of it except for maybe 2 questions, but the rest of it is the fucking same. And there's just some games on the market that are literally copycats. And sometimes they're not even doing a service to where the inspiration comes from. It's worse. So don't misunderstand me when I talk about Monster Hunter clones, Because I'm literally talking about games that may even be stealing assets from Monster Hunter itself. I mean, the very long sword swipes you're looking at right now, most of it is literally from Monster Hunter. While some of these moves are slightly varied and changed around just a bit, it's literally kind of a copy and paste, and then a slight edit. So that would definitely be what I would call a clone. Now, I know UI can definitely be a point of contention. I mean, a lot of UIs look very similar. But I mean, if it quacks like a duck, I mean, it might be a duck, right? Just saying. Now, when it comes to a lot of the Chinese developed games that seems to kind of borrow assets from other existing properties, this is kind of a history that goes back a long while. And it doesn't necessarily have much to do with just wanting to take stuff and use it as their own. It's kind of more so of different copyright laws and the fact that gaming in China has been kind of weird for a really long time. And most of that time, the Chinese market didn't get even half of the games we've got. It's only been fairly recent that a lot of games from the Chinese market have been making their way to the worldwide market. So, I mean, that's probably why things seem so blatant. And a lot of the times, it is blatant. But part of it is kind of a cultural thing. It's kind of just been morally acceptable to kind of do that when developers were doing that for decades. So it's definitely something I don't necessarily agree with, but I mean, sure, whatever floats your boat. And if it comes to the West, we're probably gonna scream bloody murder anyway. I mean, we've seen it happen time and time again. Even with games like the Soul series having their fair share of copycats. Even one fairly recently, which kind of looks exactly like Sekiro, but like kind of different. Which is it's not that much different. In fact, this very game actually uses a lot of the same sound effects from the Souls games, which is kind of blatant and screams laziness, or maybe just, I don't know, being broke and not wanting to put the money into making sound effects, or even having the money to make sound effects. Well, yeah, this could get pretty dicey, and I could make a whole video on this, and maybe I will eventually, but yeah, this is definitely a clone. Definitely. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a big difference between a clone and basically something that was inspired by something else. Inspiration. Big difference. And when it comes to Monster Hunter, a lot of the games we see on the Japanese market that are similar to Monster Hunter, I wouldn't even call those clones, to be honest. At least not if I'm being serious about it. I guess you can call them Monster Hunter-like, or other action hunting games, or just, you know, other action RPGs, because that's kind of what they are, with like loose inspiration from Monster Hunter games, you know. Yeah, so I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So don't kind of get the two confused, because there's a big difference, definitely. And you know what? If you've actually made it to the end of this video and you're new here, consider liking and subbing to the channel. Also, let me know down below, like, which is your favorite Monster Hunter-like game? Even if it's kind of like a clone, let me know, I want to know. And yeah, hit that sub button. Also the bell icon, so that if YouTube actually feels like it, you'll get notified of when I post new videos. Mostly on Monster Hunter stuff. So yeah, with that, I will take my leave. And I'll see you guys and gals in the next one.